But anyway, I'm Richard Mills, and I want to present to you a tool that I like. So this is an introduction to Nuxt.js. And I have here a meta framework, or a framework for your frameworks, if you will. First, who am I? I'm Richard Mills, as already been mentioned. I'm a recent graduate of McEwen University Computer Science. I'm a junior software developer at a startup called Quote to Me here in town. I just started there in January. And on day-to-day basis, I develop in Vue and Python. And in the Vue development, I use Nuxt, which we will get into here right away. First, I guess, who is this talk for? Maybe you use Vue and you would like a tool to generate a production-ready project. This is good for you. Maybe you just like Vue and you want some more structure to your project. So I know there's a lot of best practices. In this talk, I'm going to talk about the structure of a project quite a bit in a bunch of different aspects, because it's one of the things that Nuxt does really well. So go along with that. Maybe you just want a structured project in general. Maybe you're interested in Vue and you're just sort of curious what is out there. Maybe you're interested in front-end frameworks just in general. I mean, there's enough of them, so why not just dive into another one? And I just want to say, so this talk is not about Vue, but Nuxt is built on top of Vue and for Vue. So if you want to use Nuxt, you're probably going to want to use Vue. Otherwise, you're mashing things together. All right, what does Nuxt do? So Nuxt allows you to easily start a Vue project from scratch. So this will include like Vuex, the store, Vue router, and Vue meta. It can allow you to build your project as with server-side rendering, as a single-page application, or a statically generated site. It provides functionality based on project structure, and I'll get into that more in the back half of this. It is also modular. There are official plugins, community plugins, or just homebrew your own plugin and plug it into Nuxt. It's easy enough to do. And then it's enjoyable. So one of the things Nuxt really focuses on is developer experience. And I really like this. I really enjoy it. And that's why I'm here pitching it to you guys. So why I like Nuxt. I like Vue. I really like, it's probably my favorite right now for just building UIs. It allows you to easily create a Vue project. So if you've ever spun one up from start, plugging in all the libraries and modules and all the add-ons can quickly become a huge headache to get it all working together. The project structure has meaning, something I find really interesting. And these two are sort of tied together, but writing routes is just a pet peeve of mine for whatever reason. So Nuxt will build routes for you, which is super nice. There's a ton of modules available, official and community, and it's easy to configure, which I'll also touch on sort of in the back half of this. Just as an introduction, it felt wrong to not talk about what it's like to start a Nuxt project. So once you have the command line tool, it's a really simple wizard that just steps you through everything. So like, first you're gonna choose your server-side framework. You have 8 choices to choose from. Then you're gonna choose your UI framework. This time you're presented with 10 choices or none, always a good option. Then your testing framework. So now you just Java or just an Ava or your own, so none. I find it funny that the only module that the wizard presents you with is Axios, so popular. And then you can choose to add ESLint or Prettier. And these frameworks that it supports out of the box is sort of why it's considered a meta framework. So like you'll use it to set up your project. But then besides like plugins and the occasional configuration, you're gonna start working in all these other frameworks that you've imported with Nuxt. All right, so I talked about plugins. So what are those? So Nuxt is extensible. There's a handful of officially supported plugins. So HTTP, content, Axios, the only one presented during the wizard. um, PWA for easily making progressive web apps, and auth for the authentication service. Honestly, here I only have uh, familiarity with Axios as far as the official plugins go, but there are many, many more unofficial plugins. When I linked over to GitHub, I was hit with 168 repositories that matched this query. Um, I had a quick look through those. There's a tons. I've only used a handful, like Sentry, but like if it's out there and it's popular, it's almost certainly been configured for working with Nuxt, so you don't have to do it yourself. All right, so I kind of hope that you have an idea of what Nuxt is, which is like a framework to help you set up a project and incorporate all those frameworks that are ultimately going to be your final product. And it'll help you like configure them, put them together, build, all that fun stuff. But most of the time, you're probably going to be working in these other frameworks because that's what you're actually going to have the users use. But I do want to get into just some of the cool things that Nuxt does. Okay, so I mentioned writing routes is just something I don't enjoy. I find it really repetitive. So here I just have a common pattern for writing a route with Vue. Even if you're not familiar with Vue, you can probably understand what's happening here. So we give it a path. We have the component. In this case, the first one is a parent, so that's going to be the layout. I have like a little common pattern here with the meta tag for telling it to do something else with it. Routes doesn't care about this. Typically, you care about it. And then we have the children, which will actually have our index route. So all of this set up for one route with a layout. Setting up additional routes is less work, but it's still pretty repetitive and not interesting. So here we have my terrible, terrible Google Slides drawing of a directory. So the pages folder is something that is built into Nuxt. So when you start, like when you spin up your project, it's going to be there. And it's going to allow you to not write the routes yourself. So I tried putting like a directory structure here on the left, right, and then what that URL would look like on the right. So first one, index.js, boom, there we go. I realize I'm looking at this now, and I didn't notice it before, that these should actually be Vue files, but you can probably use your imagination for this. Then I also have the things folder, so that's just arbitrary. Inside we can have an index.js or Vue. Now we have our things route, so whatever that component is going to get loaded. For those wondering about how do you fit parameters into a directory structure, sorry. For those wondering about how you put parameters into a directory structure, this is how they do it. You have the underscore, so we have the parameter ID. So now we'll have an ID within our route. So things.id at index, or we could have new, and we'll have things ID new. And then these components can access that parameter, and then you'll have them in Vue. So this is one of my favorite things about Nuxt. I really don't enjoy writing routes. But then there's the issue of middleware and layouts. So with the other pattern of writing routes, you can sort of if you have a parent, that's how you'll apply your layout, and your middleware you can plug in a variety of different ways that I'm not going to get into here. That's more Vue-centric. But in Nuxt, we have two more folders we're given. One is middleware, which we can put in just JavaScript files, and one is layouts, where we will put in Vue files. So here I have a little snippet of just say a page component. So we have access to two more attributes. One is middleware, which we can put in arrays, so we can have a bunch of them. We can have a whole middleware pipeline. And the other is layout. Because the project structure includes these, there's no importing. Just the string we use has to match everything before the extension. So super simple. You got your layouts, you got your middleware, you've got your routes. all you need to do is stick to the directory structure and plug in a few keywords or attribute names. So mentioned it was easily configurable. So this is done in a very common JavaScript fashion. You have whatever the framework is, .config.net or .js. So you have a configuration file for doing all your things. This is where you will load your plugins, configure your modules. You can set environment variables that are set during build time, which then you can access everywhere in the code. For those who have used build frameworks, this is pretty typical, but very nice. And then ultimately, it's a JavaScript file, so you can execute whatever you want. This file has a ton of attributes. For those who are really interested in it, I would recommend going to Nuxt. I don't want to get into it here. It's a little more in the weeds than I want to get for an introduction. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. All right. So I mentioned homebrewed plugins or just plugins in general. So this is another nice thing that Nuxt exposes. So when you set up your plugins in their folder and you give them a name and you load them in the config, all you have to do is supply this function definition or fingerprint. And what it will do is allow you to easily inject whatever you want to into Vue. So I have my little contrived example here of my plugin. Those who are familiar with Vue, the result of this is like if you were trying to do a similar thing, is to set it on the prototype so that you have access to this always in your components. For those less familiar with Vue, in a component, you would now be able to access this plugin at this $sign my plugin. So super easy, super to configure. Your context comes with lots of nice things like the app instance, the Axios instance, the store, so you don't have to worry about importing any of that. You just get to roll with it. All right, so just a quick summary here. So Nuxt is a Vue framework. It's meant for Vue. It's built on top of Vue. It's modular and extensible. There is a lot of community modules available. There's the official ones, and you can easily put your plugin ones in that will be run during build. It supports a number of frameworks. I believe from the setup, we counted at least 18 or 20, hence why some people call it a meta framework or a framework for your frameworks. It allows you to easily start from scratch, just roll with the wizard and you'll have a project going in no time. The project structure has meaning, which personally I think is the most interesting. So automatic rote creation via the pages folder, easy layouts via that folder and including them in your page components. And the same for middleware, which allows you to easily set up a middleware pipeline. Yeah, and then you extend it community, official, homebrewed, whatever you want. It's great. There's a lot more in this that I have not personally used. I wanted to do this talk mainly because I saw that it hasn't been talked about before. I really enjoy the meaning that the project structure has. And it's just a great tool to roll and build with. So I guess, are there any questions? And if I could stop sharing my screen would also be great. Okay, so we have a question up here of comparisons between Next.js versus Nuxt.js. Unfortunately, I have not used Next.js. As far as the main frameworks go, I don't have a ton of experience with many of them. The only other one I've spent a lot of time in is Quasar, but that's sort of like, it shares a lot of similarities as far as running a project go, except that the meaning of the directory is implicit rather than explicit. And it's not as like Quasar is sort of its own package and you don't get the other framework. So sorry I couldn't answer your question directly as is, but I haven't done a ton of front end. Besides dabbling, most of it has now been at work at Code2Me. Yes. Do we have other questions? All right, question. Would you recommend starting with Nuxt for someone who wants to try out Vue? Yeah, I think it's like Nuxt will do the project setup for you. So you can do this a lot too with like the Vue CLI tool. And maybe if you just want to write pure Vue and maybe with a simple server to serve it with, then sure, just start with Vue. But if you want to like maybe you want to try out Vue with some UI frameworks. I would definitely recommend Nuxt then. Uh, but maybe just to appreciate what it does, if you just want to dabble with Vue, you don't care about UI framework tool to start it up. Do we got another question? Oh, there we go. What's the advantage of a Nuxt plugin over just including a library in your bundle? That's a good question. They do a lot of the setup and configuration for you. So I sort of showed that template of the that inject function. So with something really common that doesn't tie into a lot of things, you could probably get away with just installing the library and writing your own plugin to load it in. This is all assuming you want to inject it into Vue or do some setup during build. So mainly the modules like that Nuxt makes available or that the community makes available is just, it ties better into Nuxt. So that setup is done for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And then you can also configure it in the like a Nuxt config file. So typically like if you're using Axios, you can put Axios in there and you can configure it that way. Or if you're using like Sentry, even though it's a community one, you can configure it all within this file without sort of like doing it yourself. So it allows you to centralize your configuration and not worry about injecting. All right, when you deploy this app, you can't serve it as the same origin as your API, can you? I believe you can. I don't see why you couldn't. Sorry. Just think for a second how to answer this one. So like in a production environment, we serve from the same origin, but we split the requests via a server, but that's because we have a separate backend. You could also write your API and have that like a node server. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I believe I had this question, but would you recommend starting with Nuxt for someone who just wants to try out Vue? If you want to roll with the UI frameworks that Nuxt supports, and you don't care to learn about writing routes the manual way, totally. If you really want to learn Vue, I would spin up first with Vue CLI, and then I would graduate to one of the more comprehensive build frameworks. Everything, all right, so I'll read the question. Vue's own docs are super good in my opinion. Does Nuxt have great docs as well, or are there recommended sources for getting started with it? Everything I've wanted to do with Nuxt, I've been able to use their docs to do it. Having said that, I have had like great mentors to work with as well, and I'm sure that helps a lot. And I also have really great code to reference, which is oftentimes even better than docs. But everything I've had to do, I've just gone to their docs or the module docs, depending on what I'm looking at, and it's all been fine. They're not as comprehensive as Vue's docs, because Vue's docs are great. but like you sort of set up Nuxt and roll with it. Like you when you get right into the weeds of configuration, then you're looking for docs. And I feel like you probably won't encounter that too often. It's pretty easy to run. All right, do we have more questions?
Hello, I am
Hello.
back. Fantastic job, Richard. That's kind of the end of the questions that we have for you. Is there anything else you want to say before we banish you to the corners of the internet?
All right, before you get rid of me, just thanks for listening to my talk or watching my talk or whatever the right terminology is. It was my first one, hopefully not last. And yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing you all around Exchange.js hopefully in the future. Hopefully you're not a one and done kind of person. So.